Imagine waking up one morning to find that the future is no longer being built in factories or shaped in parliaments, but coded silently behind closed doors, traded in cloud servers, and decided by machines that never sleep. What if I told you that the next global war is already underway, not with bullets or bombs, but with algorithms, infrastructure, and ideology? And what if you're not just a spectator, but one of its most important decision makers? This is not just a battle between two countries. It's a global power shift that affects what we see, how we think, and who we trust. It's the United States and China locked in a quiet but fierce Cold War, with Europe standing in the middle, holding more influence than it realizes. In the next few minutes, we're going to dive deep into the unseen front lines of this conflict. You'll discover how tech is being weaponized, how narratives are being shaped, and how your choices as a citizen, creator, or policymaker could shape the future of freedom, innovation, and global peace. This isn't speculation. It's already happening right now. So don't blink, don't scroll away, because what you're about to hear could change the way you look at the world, and more importantly, your role in it. Let's begin. The conflict between the United States and China did not begin with missiles or military threats. It began with tariffs. What appeared to be a typical trade war quickly revealed itself as something deeper, more strategic, and long-lasting. At its heart lies a struggle over technological dominance. Initially, the U.S. imposed tariffs on Chinese goods to address trade imbalances, but it soon became clear that these measures were part of a broader strategy to contain China's technological rise. In response, China didn't retreat. Instead, it doubled down on its efforts to become self-sufficient in key sectors such as semiconductors, telecommunications, and artificial intelligence. Technology has become the new battleground where both superpowers are seeking control. The U.S. began restricting China's access to advanced chips and imposed sanctions on major firms like Huawei, accusing them of espionage and threatening national security. Meanwhile, China launched its Made in China 2025 plan, investing billions to nurture homegrown tech giants and reduce dependency on American innovation. This race has intensified as both sides now view access to and control over emerging technologies not just as economic assets, but as instruments of geopolitical power. Unlike previous economic rivalries, this isn't just about who builds cheaper products. It's about who defines the future. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, cybersecurity, and space technology are now the front lines. Control over these technologies means influence over global norms, values, and systems. That's why both countries are pouring resources into research, forming strategic alliances, and protecting their intellectual property with increasing aggression. This shift from a trade war to a tech war marks a critical evolution in international relations. Where once goods and commodities were at the center of global disputes, now it is ideas, innovation, and digital infrastructure that are contested. The US and China understand that the one who leads in technology leads in influence, economy, and security. What's more, they understand that this race isn't just between them. It's about setting the global agenda for decades to come. In this context, tariffs were only the beginning. They were the opening shots in a longer, more complex confrontation. that now spans every sector of modern life, from smartphones and 5G to satellites and AI ethics. This is not just a policy dispute, it's a foundational clash over who will shape the next era of human progress. The modern era influence isn't spread through military bases or flags on foreign soil. It's embedded in code, platforms, and the networks that connect the world. The United States and China have both recognized that whoever controls the world's digital infrastructure has the power to shape global narratives, control information flow, and set the standards for communication and behavior. This realization has transformed digital infrastructure from a tool of convenience into a weapon of soft power, from undersea cables and satellites to data centers and 5G towers. Both nations are racing to build, fund, and export their own versions of a connected world. The US, for decades, dominated the digital realm through companies like Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and Amazon. These platforms became global default tools for communication, commerce, and information. With them came American norms, free expression, open platforms, and capitalist-driven data use. China, on the other hand, cultivated its own digital ecosystem, isolated from the West, but rapidly expanding in influence. Giants like Huawei, TikTok, Alibaba, and Tencent became powerful vehicles for exporting Chinese tech and indirectly Chinese governance models. And this competition intensified as both countries started offering infrastructure to other nations. China's Belt and Road Initiative now includes a digital Silk Road, where it builds telecom networks, cloud storage systems, and surveillance technologies in countries across Asia, Africa, and Eastern Europe. These systems often come with embedded technology that reflects Chinese control and data protocol. In response, the US has launched initiatives to counter these moves, offering alternatives and pressuring allies to reject Chinese firms, citing national security and privacy concerns. What makes this battle more complex is that it doesn't look like traditional war. There are no obvious casualties, but the stakes are enormous. When a country adopts one system over another, it's not just choosing a supplier, it's choosing a worldview. Decisions about data access, censorship, facial recognition, and online surveillance are embedded in the infrastructure itself. Whoever installs the cables and writes the code gets to shape the flow of truth and, by extension, the behavior of societies. Europe finds itself caught between these two models, pressured to pick sides while also trying to maintain digital sovereignty. As the fight intensifies, the control of global narratives through digital infrastructure becomes not just a technical issue, but a profound question of freedom, identity, and influence in the 21st century. The US-China confrontation is not only ideological or technological, it's economic at its core, with supply chains emerging as a primary battleground. For decades, globalization created a deep web of interdependence, with China becoming the world's factory and the US serving as a dominant consumer and innovator. This arrangement brought efficiency and lower costs, but it also created vulnerabilities that the current geopolitical climate is exposing. As tensions rose, both sides began to view economic interdependence not as a strength, but as a strategic liability capable of being weaponized at any moment. The United States, alarmed by its dependence on Chinese manufacturing, especially in critical areas like rare earth minerals, semiconductors, and pharmaceutical ingredients, has taken steps to diversify and reshore production. Policies have been enacted to limit Chinese involvement in key industries, restrict investment, and encourage the development of alternative supply chains in friendly nations. At the same time, export controls on advanced chip technologies and manufacturing equipment have been introduced to prevent China from gaining ground in sensitive sectors like AI and quantum computing. China, facing external pressure and an increasingly hostile global environment, has accelerated its push for self-reliance. It has poured billions into domestic innovation and capacity building programs, striving to close the gap with the West in high-tech industries. This strategic decoupling is not merely reactive. It's part of a long-term vision to ensure China cannot be held hostage by foreign sanctions or technology bans. The Chinese leadership sees supply chain independence as essential to its national security and future global standing. This weaponization of trade and production has profound consequences. It is disrupting the very foundation of global commerce, which once relied on stable and predictable international collaboration. Businesses now face growing uncertainty as geopolitical risks replace purely economic calculations. Multinational corporations are reconsidering their operations, investments, and partnerships as politics infiltrate boardroom decisions. Europe, too, is feeling the ripple effects. As supply chains fragment, European companies are being forced to assess their exposure to both superpowers and determine how to remain competitive without becoming entangled in the conflict. The shift away from a globalized, interconnected economy toward more regional, politically aligned production networks signals a fundamental change. What was once an invisible web of trade is now a visible front line in the broader US-China standoff, where economic ties are no longer just business, they are leverage, pressure, and power. Europe today finds itself at the center of a geopolitical tug-of-war between the United States and China, not by accident, but by strategic necessity. Both superpowers recognize Europe's unique position: economically advanced, politically influential, and ideologically diverse. In a conflict where ideology, technology, and trade converge, Europe holds a deciding vote in how the global order evolves. As the US-China Cold War intensifies, Europe is no longer a passive observer. It is the strategic battleground where values, systems, and spheres of influence collide. The United States views Europe as a crucial ally in its mission to contain China's rise, particularly in areas like 5G infrastructure, artificial intelligence, and critical minerals. Washington has lobbied European nations to exclude Chinese firms from their networks, adopt stricter export controls, and align regulatory standards with Western values of transparency, openness, and democratic accountability. NATO's evolving role and transatlantic digital initiatives further reflect America's effort to build a unified Western front. China, on the other hand, sees Europe as a critical market and a potential wedge against US hegemony. Through investments in ports, telecoms, and energy infrastructure, especially in Southern and Eastern Europe, China has sought to build long-term economic influence. Its Belt and Road Initiative extends deep into European territory, offering loans and infrastructure development, where traditional Western institutions have hesitated. Moreover, Chinese tech giants continue to court European consumers, regulators, and governments with promises of innovation, lower costs, and non-interference in domestic affairs. This competition forces Europe into a delicate balancing act. On one hand, it relies on American security guarantees and shares many cultural and political values with the US. On the other hand, it sees China as an indispensable economic partner, especially in manufacturing, green energy, and consumer markets. European leaders are increasingly advocating for strategic autonomy, aiming to chart an independent course without being forced into binary choices. However, that independence is harder to maintain as global pressure mounts. Every decision, whether it involves approving a Chinese tech merger, participating in a US-led semiconductor alliance, or adopting global AI rules, has broader implications. Europe's choices are being watched closely by both Beijing and Washington. It is no longer simply about trade or diplomacy. It's about who gets to set the rules of the future. Europe's alignment, whether subtle or bold, will shape the balance of power in this new Cold War far more than most recognize. At the heart of the US-China Cold War lies a battle that transcends hardware and infrastructure. It is a battle over the minds and behaviors of future generations, fought through the development and deployment of artificial intelligence. AI is no longer just a technological frontier. It has become an ideological weapon. The way machines think, recommend content, analyze behavior, and make decisions is shaped by the values embedded in their code. As both nations race to build the most advanced AI systems, they are also encoding their own worldviews into these tools. One leaning toward centralized control and surveillance, the other toward individual freedoms and commercial openness. So the United States has historically led the AI revolution through companies like OpenAI, Google, and Microsoft, with algorithms trained on open data sets and guided by Western notions of privacy, fairness, and innovation. These systems often emphasize transparency, decentralized regulation, and user consent. By contrast, China has prioritized AI development as a core pillar of national strategy, integrating it deeply into governance, security, and societal control. Chinese AI models are often designed to align with state policies, enabling facial recognition, predictive policing, and large-scale social credit systems that reinforce centralized authority. This difference in ideological design has enormous implications. AI is now being used to determine what news people see, how they are monitored in public, which job applicants are shortlisted, and even how citizens interact with government services. As AI becomes more integrated into daily life, the bias, intent, and ethics behind these systems become increasingly critical. The danger is that the most effective AI systems may be adopted not for their moral superiority, but for their efficiency and power, regardless of the societal costs. Nations around the world, including those in Europe, are being offered these competing systems. One version promises rapid development, enhanced security, and economic growth, but at the risk of reduced freedoms. The other promises ethical safeguards and democratic accountability, but often at a slower pace and higher cost. This ideological divide is shaping global AI standards, governance structures, and legal frameworks. As a result, artificial intelligence has become a proxy for larger political philosophies. The values baked into these systems will influence how societies function, how privacy is protected, and how truth is perceived. This is no longer a race about who can build smarter machines. It's about who gets to define the ethics of intelligence itself. In the escalating rivalry between the United States and China, economic measures are being repurposed into powerful weapons of disruption, often masked behind the language of national security, legal compliance, or regulatory standards. What might appear as routine, export restrictions, or corporate investigations often serves a deeper strategic aim: to sabotage the rivals' technological and industrial capabilities without firing a single shot. These covert battlegrounds sees governments increasingly targeting companies not because of what they've done wrong legally, but because of what they represent in the geopolitical chessboard. A clear example is the treatment of tech giants. The US placed Chinese firms like Huawei and ZTE on export blacklists, cutting them off from critical chip supplies and software essential to their operations. While the stated reasons were security concerns, the broader motive was clear: contain the rise of Chinese dominance in global telecommunications. In retaliation, China has launched antitrust investigations into American firms, restricted rare earth exports, and implemented cybersecurity reviews aimed at deterring Western tech penetration into its domestic markets. These tit-for-tat measures are not isolated responses. They are carefully calibrated acts of economic warfare. The battlefield extends beyond direct sanctions. Regulatory and legal tools are now used to instill fear, create uncertainty, and signal dominance. Whether it's investment restrictions on Chinese firms in American tech sectors, data localization laws that limit cross-border access, or financial audits aimed at delisting Chinese companies from foreign stock exchanges, the intent is strategic deceleration of the opponent's influence. These measures are designed to weaken confidence, shake investor trust, and fragment global business ecosystems that once thrived on mutual cooperation. This climate of hostility has made the corporate world a front line for geopolitical struggle. Multinational companies now find themselves caught in a storm where compliance with one superpower could mean exclusion by another. Innovation pipelines are being disrupted, global partnerships are strained, and research collaborations are increasingly viewed through the lens of espionage risk rather than scientific progress. The lines between business, politics, and security have been permanently blurred. Europe, situated in the middle, is being forced to choose regulatory paths that often tilt toward one side or the other. The continent's own tech policies, data governance frameworks, and trade practices are under intense scrutiny. As both superpowers deploy regulation as a weapon, the ability to remain neutral while preserving economic openness is becoming increasingly difficult. This new mode of sabotage, veiled under policy and law, may prove more destabilizing than traditional conflict because it attacks the foundations of global trust and economic integration. What we are witnessing is not a traditional Cold War with soldiers and missiles. It is a sophisticated, multidimensional struggle fought through code, commerce, ideology, and influence. The United States and China are no longer just trading partners. They are rival architects of two competing visions for the future, from digital infrastructure to artificial intelligence, from economic leverage to geopolitical maneuvering. Each side is trying to shape a world in its own image. Yet in this global standoff, the silent battlegrounds are the devices in our hands, the networks we trust, and the values we embed in technology. Europe stands at a critical crossroads, not as a bystander, but as a powerful voice with the potential to shape the direction of this century. The choices made here on regulation, trade, alliances, and innovation will not only determine Europe's role in the global order, but may also decide which vision of the future prevails. Amid the noise of confrontation, this is a moment that calls for clarity, courage, and conviction. It's not only about who wins, but what kind of world we are building as we move forward. Thank you all for listening, for reflecting, and for daring to think beyond headlines. The future is not something we inherit, it's something we create. Good luck in being part of that creation, and may your decisions lead toward progress, peace, and purpose. Thank you.